Hi, and welcome to the BIMI Group's informational sessions on BIMI and all things tools related to building BIMI. So I have with me today, Trent Adams. Trent is the Director of Ecosystem Security for Proofpoint. He's building on his work in the past with PayPal, where he developed and advocated for secure internet standards. Trent's also helping build the technology behind BIMI and really help build out the validation process when it comes to things like SVGs and secure certificates, and really the certification process in general. Trent's background is really exciting, and I'm really interested and glad to know Trent. He's a futurist focused on online identity, privacy, security. He appeared as an extra in Star Wars: The Force Awakens. He produced an independent film called Norman. And I learned this recently, he has 3 Super Bowl rings from his time in the back office with the New England Patriots. Trent, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to have you here, and looking forward to talking about these tools that we have now for everyone.
Yeah, excellent, Matt. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I think that in the next few minutes, we should be able to hopefully get a lot of information across as quickly and efficiently as we can to the audience, because as we're going to focus on, I think, the image creation and validation and conversion tools. There's a lot to talk about, and hopefully we can dispel some myths, help clarify things for folks, and really get them off and running to make their BIMI logos work effectively.
Great, yeah, and anything we don't cover today, as always, bimigroup.org is your place to get all the latest information, all the latest articles, resources, links to all the right RNCs and documentation about BIMI that you'll need, as well as how to generate your logos and how to generate your BIMI records. So Trent, we're going to dive right in since we've already started talking about it. You know, tell me what's special about the logo formats for BIMI.
Yeah, that's probably the best question to start with, because everyone says, oh, you know, I've got a logo. I've got logos in multiple formats. Which one do I need to use? And, you know, the sad answer is, well, you need a new one. Which kind of trips people up a little bit. But we've defined a new profile of an existing scale vector format, SVG format. And the question is really why? Why did you develop a new format? Why didn't you just use an existing one? You know, working in InfoSec, I think a lot about the security of the kinds of standards that we're developing. And one of the things we were really worried about early on was if we introduce a domain-controlled image format that is then accepted and embedded in an email message displayed by some other mailbox provider or mailbox email client, is there a way that somebody could sneak something in? And we wanted to use a scaled format because we didn't know, is this thing going to be displayed at a little tiny little bobble in the side of the message list view? Is it going to be displayed as, you know, as a larger icon next to the details view? Well, we didn't know. I mean, everyone's going to kind of do something differently. And so rather than specify a format that would be lossy, right? So that if you scaled it in different directions, it would look bad. We decided to go with a scaled vector format, so that we're using the SVG format that's defined by the W3C. The problem is that SVG in and of itself allows for interactivity. I mean, it's a very clever, very rich format that actually you can interact with, very much like a web page. And so we pretty much knew we got to strip that out. So we went looking and found that there is a format that the W3C had defined called SVG Tiny 1.2. And it was pretty close to what we wanted, but it still had some interactivity elements that we didn't want to support. We just didn't think from a security standpoint it was the right thing to be promoting. So we defined a new profile. And so we defined a new profile that we published as an internet draft to the IETF called SVG Tiny Portable and Secure. So SVG Tiny PS. And this portable secure format is a downsampled version of what standard SVG Tiny 1.2 is. So that's why we came up with a new standard. It's not just because we wanted to and we thought the world needed more standards. No, we actually thought about it. We figured out what we needed to do and defined the standard. So we've published the draft to the IETF. So it's under review and people are commenting on it. But that also meant that there is no existing tool that exports into that format. And because there's no existing tool, we had to make one. And of course, we didn't stop at one. We developed 3. So we've got 3 tools that we developed and have published on the bimigroup.org website. So if you want to find the tools, you can go there. There's 3 different tools. One is a conversion tool from SVG Tiny 1.2 into SVG Tiny Portable Secure that we defined. There's one for Windows 10. And there's another standalone tool for Mac OS. I think it's 14 plus, whatever the version is. So there's one for Windows, there's one for Mac. But we didn't stop there. But wait, Matt, there's more. We also realized that most designers work in Adobe Illustrator. And because of that, we also created a script that you can load into Adobe Illustrator and export right into the correct format for BIMI. So SVG Tiny Portable Secure. It's a little bit tricky. First you need to know how to download and install scripts in Adobe Illustrator. Hopefully most designers do, but there's that. We did describe in the how-to pages how you can do this, how anybody can do it. But at any rate, so that's one step. The other step is that you first do need to create the image in SVG Tiny 1.2 format. Once you've got it into that format, and you can just, in Adobe Illustrator already has this export function. Once it's in that format, then you can run the script to export into SVG Tiny Portable Secure that BIMI requires. So it's a couple extra steps, but the tools are there now. You don't have to monkey with it. You can download the tools, run them, and get going. Now there's some gotchas, and I'm sure we'll talk about them in a second here. There's some gotchas. There's some things everyone should be aware of, and we're happy to kind of help guide you through the process. But for now, I mean, honestly, we got the tools. Download them from bimigroup.org, and you're rocking and rolling, man.
Yeah, and I think the important piece, right? Anything that we're doing in the standards community here, right? We're trying to do our best to make sure they're open source and make sure that the community has access to, validate first off that the tools are secure for their own use, but also, build and improve on those. So not only are they available on the BIMI Group website, we've also put them on our GitHub. So that, as the community comes together and starts working with these tools, there's going to be things that we didn't think about when it comes to building these scripts and building these tools that hopefully, naturally progress through evolution through help of the community itself.
Yeah. In fact, I think you brought up 2 really good points that are worth, drilling into. One is, how do you validate that your logo is in the proper format? And I could talk about a tool that we also developed. It's an RNC schema validator. So we have that available on bimigroup.org as well to validate that the file you think is in the right format is in fact in the right format. So we can talk about that. But the other thing that you mentioned, I think is really cool, is these tools we developed have been released under a free open source software license, MIT license, which basically means we're giving it to the community. We published it on the GitHub, and we encourage people to go to the GitHub repository, again, linked to from bimigroup.org. Go to the GitHub repository. If you find bugs, if you find enhancements, if there's features that you want to see, do the GitHub thing. So you do your GitHub thing there, and just by the nature of being released under the MIT license, anything that's done gets folded right back to the community. So even for commercial use, by the way. So if somebody wants to use these tools for commercial use, more power to you. But you're exactly right. It is about empowering the community to help, raise all the boats.
Right, and I think that's an important piece, right? Like, we understand as we built the tool, as we built the standard for BIMI, that these tools didn't exist. So we went out and took that initiative to say, here's at least a starting point for those tools. So please, community, take them, enhance them. There's going to be things. Well, as a collective.
Yeah, and the other thing is, for those folks who work in the ITF community, rough consensus and running code, man. You get a group of people who come together and like, yeah, this is roughly kind of the thing we think is a good idea. Roughly. Oh yeah, by the way, I've done a whole bunch of code that actually does the thing we just talked about. Right. That separates the wheat from the chaff. right? You've got a whole bunch of ideas that are brilliant, really well thought out, very theoretically defensible and rich. And if they ain't got any code running, you're not going to get as far. So we've got the code that proves the model that we're talking about. Now, to be clear, Matt, we should probably tell people this is not the end all be all of the specification, right? SVG tiny portable secure is not it's not a standard. It is a profile. It's a draft profile of an existing standard. So I firmly believe, and I think the community understands, that this profile is going to change.
Sure.
There will be additions, there will be modifications. So we're kind of on a journey here, which is another reason why releasing the tools, the conversion tools on GitHub is very important, because as the standards change, well, as the draft changes on its way to being standardized, we need a mechanism to keep the tools up to date. So what we're talking about today, whenever anybody's watching this video, the validation and conversion tools may have changed by the time we recorded the video, right? So
Sure.
Today we recorded the video, we've got them working in a certain way. However many months later somebody's watching this, they may have changed. So always download the latest version of the conversion tools. Make sure you're using those, which rolls back to something you said a second ago, and that's the validation tool. Now, put your geek hat on for this. What we've talked about so far is kind of designer land. If you're a designer, you can download these tools and make the graphics and export them to a format. That's totally cool. Now, to be another level of tech geek on this, we have developed an RNC validator script. And essentially what this is, without going into too much detail to melt your brain, essentially what this is a way to validate that that an image in our profile matches the profile specification. Right. So what you can do is you can take your logo that you've exported and you think should be right. You can bang it against the RNC schema validator, and then it will tell you whether or not it validated against the schema. We've got, again, on bimigroup.org, we've got a really in-depth blog post describing exactly how to do this. Walks you step by step through downloading the RNC schema, compiling the necessary scripts, and running it. So it's all there. That being said, we do not expect designers to do this. But at any rate, it's there. That's how you validate that, in fact, an image is working correctly. So hopefully we've got all the tools, the pieces of the puzzle there. Still needs a little duct tape and baling wire to pull them together, but I don't think we have any major gap yet.
So Trent, speaking of maybe not gaps specifically, but what other types of gotchas have we seen with people trying to create logos? We get all kinds of questions coming through the website, but we're seeing different types of them. Like, what are the common gotchas or common mistakes people make when it comes to creating their logos and trying to get them so that they validate?
Yeah, honestly, I'd classify them in two different camps of problems that we see. Now, let's say 3 camps. Let's say there's 3 camps. One camp is using a tool that is SVG tiny12 ignorant. So if you're using a vector design tool, or man, if you're using Photoshop or something, you're using the wrong tool, man. So that's one camp. You're using the wrong tool to design your logo. If you've got yourself a logo, you don't know any better because you're just a guy who owns a pizza shop. You're like, I've got my pizza logo. And you don't realize that that GIF is not a vector graphic.
Right.
And you created it in Microsoft Paint. Yeah, it's not going to work, buddy. So that's one. So a class of somebody not using the right tool. It's got to be a vector tool. The other class, I'd say,
or Inkscape, those tend to work well, even though they don't quite export currently in the right format. They get you real close.
In fact, you bring up a really interesting point. Okay, so let's take the 2 major commonly available scale vector graphic tools, Adobe Illustrator and Inkscape, right? There's others, but let's take these 2 because they're the predominant tools in use. Inkscape, let's start there. It is all SVG based, man. every file it generates is SVG. That being said, they're not standardized SVG. They're proprietary profiles that they've defined, which is totally fine. It works for their machinery, and if you're importing and outputting from their machinery using their SVG, their SVG profiles, totally fine. It doesn't violate anything. There's no problem doing it. It's just that it doesn't export into the exact format that the W3C defined as SVG Tiny12, which is the input to the BIMI version, SVG Tiny Portable Secure. So now that being said, our tools, our conversion tools, either the Windows 10 conversion tool or the Mac OS conversion tool, do take some of that into account.
Right.
It doesn't catch every nuance that can be exported out of an Inkscape file, but if the Inkscape file is really stripped down and simple, then it can convert into, you can use the conversion tools from Inkscape, exported from Inkscape, even if they're not SVG Tiny12. It can attempt to move them into SVG Tiny Portable Secure. In a second here, we'll come back and I'll tell you how to clean those up, the ones that don't work. But so you can always try that with Inkscape, right? The second one is Adobe Illustrator. And Adobe Illustrator kind of chaps my hide, man. They have an export as SVG Tiny12. Problem is, it's actually not compliant with the W3C specification. There's a couple of lingering things that they leave in the file format that aren't supposed to be there. And so what we've done is in both the Adobe Illustrator export script, and then also in the conversion tools, we look for that and make the necessary changes. So we'll extract things that shouldn't be there, and we'll transform things that need to be moved or changed. So we've taken that into account. We're just assuming that the Adobe Illustrator format isn't actually right, and we fix it. Right. So that's one. But the other thing is that once you've exported it out into the SVG Tiny12, SVG Tiny Portable Secure format, the format that BIMI needs, you still want to run it through the RNC validator to make sure that it works. Because even if our conversion tools think it did it right, you got to make sure that that it validates correctly. And want to go back to something that we were talking about earlier. What are the gotchas? Number one is make sure that it's in as close to the right format as possible. Make sure it's the simplest possible logo you can do. Strip out any interactivity. So one of the things about SVG is you can embed links, right? So you can embed a link so that if somebody in part of your logo wants to click on something, SVG lets you do that. We strip that out. Make sure it's not in there, right? Just start there. Don't put that stuff in there. Animation, it's another thing we don't support. So if your logo is animated, if you think it's a really cool idea to have your logo be the earth with the sun rising, kind of cool idea, right? But don't do that because we don't like animation. Animation is an insecure vector of attack. So we block that. So there's a couple of things that just, are kind of just don't do the crazy, cool, shiny thing. Make a really stripped down, really simple logo, and it'll probably work. The other thing that we've noticed is in document style referencing. Now this gets well beyond most designers who use a tool to design their logo. But if you look at the code of an SVG file, it's just an XML document. If you look at the code of the XML that defines the SVG image, what you'll see in there is sometimes internal references to styles, which seems to make sense, right? If you're used to developing web pages, why should I have to say I want this white every time? I'm going to define white at the top, and I'm going to reference that by ID. Makes a lot of sense, because if you want to change from white to beige, you just make one change and all of the references to white are now beige. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, that internal referencing mechanism, again, opens the door to potential insecurity, right? There's a potential, we haven't seen this as an active attack, but it's a potential. Somebody could sneak something in by reference or multiple references. So we force that to be gone. So essentially we force it to every reference to be local and not by style. So you got to strip those style sheets out. So those are just some of the common gotchas. It's make it simple, try to use the tool that gets it as close as possible, convert it, and then double check it with the RNC.
Yeah, I think that.
Or call me on the phone, and I'll be like, "Yeah, man, I'll fix your logo for you. Why not?"
Sure, he's got a Fiverr account. So I would say the other one that maybe we didn't discuss, or maybe it's part of a, you know, sort of the bigger buckets, is the idea of taking a JPEG, putting it into your vector document, and then just trying to export it. So you've got a rasterized image that isn't going to scale properly. So you do need to make sure if you are making that conversion, and there are actually lots of videos. I learned how to do it on my own logos. Through Inkscape. I would say I use Inkscape in order to take a JPEG and turn it into a properly functioning SVG tiny PS. So there are videos out there on how to go from a JPEG to a vector, and then with the tools that we've provided with the BIMI group to go from the SVG tiny export to the SVG tiny PS export. So all of these things are possible. If I figured it out being a non-designer, non-coder, you can too.
Yeah, but dude, you also figured out how to use the RNC validator. So, yes. I mean, come on, man.
if Trent can teach me to do it, honestly, anyone can do it.
That's brilliant. No,
we wrote the instructions. Really well. The instructions are for you to find. They're on the BIMI group blog, so please do check those out. Trent, I think, you know, last question, I think, before we sort of, you know, move on, right, is, you know, where do people go? Like, what is the, beyond just going to bimigroup.org, right? What is the next place? Like, someone wants to get involved with defining the standard for BIMI. Someone wants to get involved, right? Where do they go to sort of join the discussion, if you will, for that?
Yeah, I'd say that there's probably three different levels of where people should go. If you're just a designer and you just want help using, you know, converting the tool, and Matt, you brought up a great one. I took my logo and I imported it into Adobe Illustrator and exported it as tiny SVG, and it still doesn't work because it's got an embedded JPEG in it, right? Because they started from something that wasn't an SVG, they put it in the file, and they tried exporting it. They followed the rules, and it still isn't working. Well, where do you go for questions like that, right? Honestly, we've got a great FAQ on the bimigroup.org website where we're taking all of these questions that come in and cataloging them and trying to answer them, because a lot of the same ones come in, obviously, frequently asked questions, right? I mean, it's the way it works. But then also, if you don't see the questions there, we've also got links on the bimigroup.org website to pose your question, right? So you can kind of, like, at that level, collaborate with us on that. To go another level of depth, if you want to collaborate on the tools, right? So you're like, well, okay, I've got this idea that I've been using the tool, but man, I really wish that there was a way to do batches, right? Like right now, we can only, it's one file in, it's one file out, yeah, which is fine. I mean, you can just, you know, do one. But if you're a graphic designer and you've got, you know, you're working for a dozen customers and you've got a folder that you want to convert into BIMI, you're like, I want to just do this whole folder, right? So imagine that's a good idea. Where do you go for that? Well, go to the GitHub. And you'll find the GitHub link on the bimigroup.org website, and, you know, file your request there. You don't even have to be a coder. You can just go there and file an issue. Just go into GitHub, file an issue, and say, hey, I think this would be a cool idea. If the rest of the community thinks so too, it might get done. So that's the second level. The third level is a little more complicated, because that's what about the specification itself. And the tiny SVG specification, while it's ostensibly being designed to support BIMI, it's actually much broader than that. The reason we're not calling it the SVG BIMI specification is it's the SVG portable secure specification, because we fully believe that if we get this right, it has legs well beyond BIMI in all sorts of different contexts. And so that's a little bit more difficult, and we're spinning up the conversation at the IETF. So if you, I don't know, if you Google the IETF and SVG tiny portable secure, you might be able to find it. But anybody can engage in the IETF conversation, by the way. You don't have to be a member. You can engage. But you do have to kind of know the ropes a little. Find somebody who understands IETF engagement, have them help you. But at least there's those three different levels of engagement.
Great. Thanks very much, Trent. Brilliant conversation. Thank you for the tools and for explaining the new design logo standards for BIMI and how people can update their graphics and how people can update their images, the different tools that are available. Just as a reminder, bimigroup.org is where you're going to find all of this stuff, either on our blog discussing how to use the tools or on our resource page giving you actual access to the tools that you need. And we are here to help, and we will be back with additional videos and additional conversations and topics. And thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Trent.
Thanks, Matt.